Thank you all for attending today. This is a new webinar. I like to do a lot of new stuff. And this one I thought was very timely. Over the last couple years, we've had some new plants and animals and bugs and diseases that have popped up here in Georgia. Um, and so it seemed like a good time for a refresher on what we have in the state that is considered invasive or a problem that it isn't here naturally. We have a lot of we're not as bad as Florida, let's put it that way. Florida, being tropical, has a lot of invasive species. In fact, a lot of the natural endemic species have actually been pushed out due to the invasives. So Georgia is not quite as bad, but we do also have still a lot of invasives and disease. I usually tell folks we've got a hotbed of disease here when they're looking at fruit trees or things, and that's not too far from the truth. So I figured it would be a good time to kind of let you all know about what is here, what's on the horizon, what's always been a problem for the recent past, and kind of where we can go from there. All right. And as we go through, if you are uh, to these webinars, if you would like to drop your city and state in the chat box, that'd be great. And if you have any questions that you'd like me to answer as we're going through, go ahead and drop those in the chat box as well. Okay, so invasive species. There's, some misnomers about what they are. There are actual metrics that are followed with regards to what invasive species are. So let's kind of go through the background of that, and then we'll kind of push forward and we'll look at some plants and some insects and some animals and kind of go from there. So invasive species are non-native plants or animals. That part is very obvious, right? But they have been introduced either intentionally, yes, man makes lots of mistakes, or accidentally into areas that are outside of their natural ranges. So we bring a lot of plants in from over in and around like Vietnam and China and Japan. We have very similar hardiness zone here. So a lot of plants that were brought over from that region of the world do well here, and sometimes because growing conditions are slightly different. Maybe we have a little bit more rainfall. Maybe it's just a little more temperate. Introductions weren't monitored as closely earlier in the century or past centuries, and so now they've become invasive. Thankfully, we have figured out how to do that kind of introduction a little bit better. Accidental introductions, we're still working on that. Department of Agriculture handles that kind of stuff, and there are few and far between on the folks that go and do those inspections. And so a lot of these things are very small, either seeds, plant seeds, or maybe small insects, and they get through. So yeah, that's a problem. They tend to cause economic, environmental, or human health harm. So that one is very obvious. But there's a lot of things out there. And as I want to mention that a lot of invasives, they start out very innocuous. You probably may not even know they're there. They may be there 5 years or 10 years before they start causing a problem. Their population is building at that time. So by the time you hear about it or you see them, they probably have already been there for a little while. The yellow-legged hornet down in Savannah is an example of that. So likely they were there for a whole season before they were noticed. But now they're on the horizon, so we're watching out for them. Georgia specifically recognizes 83 invasive or potentially invasive plant species and 111 animal species and 30 disease-causing organisms. So that's an awful lot to keep track of. Also, there are others that are on the horizon that are surrounding us in North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Florida, and so we're continuously monitoring those. So sometimes people get really upset about invasives, and so I thought I would throw in the TENS rule, which is what is used when determining kind of what an invasive species is. So approximately 10 to 20% of introduced non-native species become established. That doesn't make them an invasive, okay? That just means that they can reproduce here, but that doesn't make them an invasive. And then of those, about 10% become invasive, okay? So invasives are less than 1% of all known species in that particular environment. And that particular environment is very different depending on where you are. So something here in central Georgia or North Georgia that's invasive might not be invasive in Illinois, or let's pick another area for 7B, Kentucky or Tennessee, or even into Alabama. They may not be because of differences in weather patterns or other things like that. And this is known as the TENS rule. So if you'd like to read a little bit more about the TENS rule, you can go on that QR code right there, and it will talk to you about what that TENS rule is and how that's factored into non-native and invasive type species. So this one is being recorded, and I always put all of my recordings up at our Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel. So you can go check this out later. It should be live, I would hope, by the end of the week. So non-native species are not protected, and that would be like coyotes. I'm going to use that as an example because people always talk about hunting. So they're not natives, and they can become a problem, somewhat invasive in urban areas where there's no known predators for them, and really there aren't, except for maybe cars. So non-native species are not protected, and they can be removed, trapped, or killed as needed. We kind of use that Hurl model. Armadillos kind of fall in that, although we're not considered invasive, but we get a lot of calls for stuff all through the year on plants, animals, disease-causing organisms, that kind of thing. So they can be removed. So the impact, the obvious things, biodiversity loss. So invasives contribute to about 60% of recorded global extinctions. That's a lot, okay? An awful lot. Worldwide, they've contributed to a decline of 42% of native species and threatened species, and in 18% in the U.S. and endangered species. So less so here. A lot of what you're seeing there in those very high numbers are going to be in tropical locations where you have a very tiny territory of maybe an insect or a bird or something like that, and they are wiped out due to man getting in there and disrupting things, that kind of stuff. They're going to outcompete, crowd out, or replace native species. We kind of know that already. Think about kudzu. Economic damage. Invasive species are going to harm agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and recreation in general. So between 1960 and 2020, they cost the U.S. at least $1.22 trillion in damages and management. So you can see why when UGA puts out an alert for a new invasive species, and they've done that recently, it's so important that we all kind of jump in and try to help and manage these. So ecosystem disruption, they can severely damage ecosystems. We already kind of know that. I'll use kudzu again as an example. It grows over the top of trees and bushes and everything. It shades out those bushes so they can't photosynthesize, and those trees and shrubs and plants go into decline. It becomes a monoculture. And so all its leaves are getting the sunlight, but nothing underneath it is. So it alters the food web, and it makes it difficult for animals to get through it. It's just a mess. So it's very important that we try to get ahead of some of these. And human health risks, mosquitoes. We've got the Asian tiger mosquito that'll be in one of these. So obviously, that's a problem. Sometimes they can bring their vectors. They can bring in diseases, viruses from other parts of the world. So let's jump in. We're going to go to the top 10 invasive animals, insects, and plants. And I think I've got some aquatic organisms in there as well. So some of these, and I'm not going to go too much because, again, if you're interested, you can always ask me for my slide deck. My contact information's at the back. I'm happy to save that and send that off to you as a PDF file for your reference. So just kind of take a look. I try to put as much info as I can on these slides. But the cane toad, that's going to be one where it's going to be mostly down south. So the cane toad is definitely a problem down in Florida and along the Gulf Coast, and it is moving up into Georgia. So we're not quite sure how far up it will move, but they're very huge, as you can see in that top right photo of that person holding that cane toad, up to 9 inches long, and they will eat everything. Nothing really eats them because they have poison glands and they're toxic. So they will also outpopulate everything else around them in addition to eating everything, and they will prey on honeybees. So it's really hard if you have hives. You've got to be really careful because they'll figure out how to get in there and eat those. Burmese pythons. So these are a big problem in Florida, but they have moved up into southern Georgia. They don't really have any natural predators when they get huge, and so the Okefenokee is really at risk here. And so they'll actually have hunts. They go out in breeding season and they try to collect eggs and snakes and destroy those, but they're from the pet trade. People couldn't take care of their big snakes, and so they just let them go. And that's a problem. So 250 pounds, that's a big snake. And there's obviously a freeze line, so probably up through Macon would be about where you would find alligators. Anything south of that is, that's worrisome. It's something that you probably need to watch out for in Georgia. Anything above that line, probably not really an issue. Here in Metro Atlanta, we're kind of in a transition zone. Probably not an issue up here. But down in South Georgia, yes. Fallow deer. We have these in St. Simon's Island, and they have crowded out or outcompeted whitetails. So they are kind of pretty to look at, but, they're invasive. They're outcompeting our native species here. So, when you have a situation like that, you can hunt them. Coyote. These guys moved in on their own. They, much like armadillos, have just expanded. They have figured out how to coexist with man. And so while they were, native or endemic out west, they have moved from the southwest out to the east. Now they are one of the apex predators, meaning they are the top of the stack in suburbia because they've figured out that man is a great place to be. And so if you have cats, outside cats, or if you have small outside dogs, you really need to be afraid because these guys, especially in breeding season, which is in the spring, they're very aggressive. If you let your little dog, your little Jack Russell, your little Pomeranian out, even in a fenced-in yard in the metro area, they can be prey for these guys. So it's very important if you do take your animals out, your dog at night, keep that dog on a leash and be there and watch that dog, especially in the spring. Cats, house cats, indoor, outdoor cats are most at risk because they don't know how to deal with that. So be very careful. And armadillos, while they're more of a nuisance species because they dig up your yard looking for insects and things. We get a lot of calls for these guys. If you're having problems with your armadillos digging up your yard, give us a call and we can give you some suggestions on what you can do to try to get them out of your yard. Feral hogs. So these are more of a problem outside of large metros, but they do use power line right-of-ways as throughways. So they are a problem. Very big problem in the southern part of the state. They dig up and cause a lot of damage. So they are very prolific. I mean, think of how many piglets there are every year. So they're a problem. House mice, very small, but very destructive if they get in your house and chew on your wiring or in your car. So they've been here for a really long time, but they've, really figured out that they like living in with humans. So in your garage, in your house, they just cause a big problem. European starlings, So they were released in New York City to start, but they have just grown in population and migrated, and now they're really bad in large areas of the country, a lot of times in urban areas, and they are pushing out a lot of native birds, out competing. Plus, they eat a lot of fruit that we would grow and sell. They're just a big problem. Brown anoles, or anoles, they're native to the Caribbean, and there are other anoles that are, and some other, again, Florida has a lot of problems with invasive lizards and things like that. So these guys were brought in cargo from Cuba in the 1800s, and they've kind of moved all across the Southeast. We have them here in the Atlanta region, and probably their biggest predator, cats, outdoor cats. But they can do a lot of damage to insect populations, beneficial insect populations, and they can outcompete the native green anole. So if you see them, feel free to collect them if you would like. The Eurasian collared dove, we don't see a ton of those around here. Again, more probably the southern part of the state. They're more from far eastern Vietnam, China, India, all kind of in there. But they are a problem in the southern part of the state. So you need to kind of keep an eye on that if you're in there. So how are invasive animals so successful? Well, they fast reproduction. They outcompete native animals. They just produce more. And they're more generalists, so they are able to live and survive way better than some of the native species, which is frustrating, if you're trying to do the right thing. Generalist diets, again, I mentioned that they eat anything. They will eat, they don't care. They are perfectly happy to grab whatever happens to wander by. And, that could be, vastly different than you have a native animal that only has a very narrow range in its diet and eats only very specific things. So, they out competing for just reproduction and all of that and what they eat. Yeah, you can see really quickly how that spirals out of control. Human transport, high mobility. So we're finding that out with the spotted lanternfly. That's an insect, but that qualifies here because they lay their egg casings on all sorts of things, and then that gets transported other places. So they're a big problem up in the Northeast, and they're very damaging to a large variety of plants, trees, and they were found in Fulton County earlier this year. So they are monitoring and trying to make sure they've got a zone there that they're trying to make sure that they clean them up and don't allow them to get established. And it's a fight. So it's an eradication fight. Tolerance to disturbance. That's probably one of the hallmarks. They don't care about disturbed areas. They figure it out. A good example is a coyote. It's figured out how to live around humans, and it thrives in suburbia. You just don't see them very much. Most people will tell you, we don't have those here. I haven't ever seen them. Oh yeah, you do. You do. They just are very stealthy, and they move mostly at night. So you may hear them at night or you may not. But they're there, I can guarantee you. No natural predators. That's a big one. They are either the apex predator or they have some toxic compound like this cane toad here that makes them unpalatable to predators. So they have some way to evade the natural predators and or they just don't have any here. And they're able to proliferate. And habitat fragmentation, so roads, developments, that kind of thing. The native species, which would normally be in that habitat, their population is reduced due to that reason. Well, these guys don't seem to care. They figure it out and they can get across all of that. All right, moving on to invasive plants. So, not everything here, but we'll come back and we'll see some others at the end. So Japanese kudzu, that's a very obvious one. That was introduced in the 1800s for soil erosion. It's still sometimes used today for soil erosion. That's probably the thing in the Southeast that most people think of is all the kudzu. Like if you're going down I-75, like from Chattanooga down and so on and so forth. So it'll shade out native plants. I already explained how it does that. It just grows over everything. It's very prolific in its growth patterns. It will grow more than 12 inches a day or a foot That's a lot. Even some places up in the mountains, where it dies back in the wintertime, you can drive down a mountain road that doesn't get a lot of traffic. And if you traverse that road over the course of a couple days, you can actually watch it creep onto the pavement. It's a little scary. So yeah, it's definitely one of those that you have to keep on top of or eradicate. If you see it growing where it's not supposed to, if it pops up on your land, kill it. Get it while it is not fully established and has not taken over everything yet, because it will. Bradford pears, this is a perfect example. So those were introduced in the 1917, and they do well in some parts of the country and are not considered invasive, but here they are. So they were basically grafted to Callery pear rootstock, and so you also will get seed distribution from birds, and they grow very quickly and will spread like nobody's business. You've seen maybe a pasture that was left fallow for a while, meaning there's no animals or it wasn't used for agriculture. These trees will sprout up very fast and take over. And then before you know it, it looks like they've been growing there for 20 years, but really it's only been a few years. So yeah, Japanese stilt grass. It loves to grow in shady, moist areas. So along a stream, a lot of Gwinnett County parks have them. If you go out to Tribble Mill, if you've been out in that area, it blankets over large swaths of the wooded areas out there because there's a lot of moist lowland areas. And it looks pretty, but native animals don't graze on it. And it's a host of the spotted lanternfly, which you'll see, when we talk about that. Japanese honeysuckle spreads very aggressively via root system, its runners, also seeds, birds. It'll block out sunlight very much like kudzu does, choking off native species by just growing over the top of it. It's just a very aggressive plant. The tree of heaven, discovered in 2014, and it's got very rapid growth. It loves disturbed habitats, and so it'll set up shop there. It can produce 300,000 seeds per year. It's also allelopathic, meaning that it produces substances that will prevent other vegetation from growing nearby, which means that nothing can crowd it out. It's a defensive mechanism. Its pollen causes allergies and skin irritations, and it's a host of the spotted lanternfly. So if you see it, and that's it on the top, then get rid of it. Cut it down, kill it. We don't want that there. Then we have, can't see my top one. Hang on a second. There we go. English ivy. So English ivy, that one was planted as an ornamental, and in other parts of the country and in the world, it's not invasive. But here, once it's established, it grows up everything, and it will grow up on a tree. It'll constrict its growth. It'll grow back down. It'll pull tree branches down. The berries are toxic to pets, and so really the best thing to do is just get rid of it. It's too dense. It grows too well here. Privet, Chinese privet, we have privet pools. You can see that in the lower left. It's big thickets. So if you're looking out here in late May, early June in the metro Atlanta area, you're going to see all of these flowers, these shrubs in the understory, very, very dense, and they're all going to be flowering, causes lots of allergy issues, and then that turns into berries that the birds will get, and then they distribute, and it's an ongoing cycle. So it's been here since the early 50s, but it really took it a while to take off. And so now you can see, there's a graph that I have. I didn't have enough time to throw it in here, but it was almost like an exponential growth curve. So once it's established, it's, almost too late. Purple loosestrife. This was established in the 1830s, and here it's not as nearly invasive as some places like upstate New York seems to have a big problem. Pennsylvania seems to have a big problem. We do see some of it here, but it's not as bad as other places. So it can produce a lot of seeds. Also has allelopathic roots and rhizomes, and it'll crowd out the natives, creating that monoculture. It is pretty when it blooms, but it does like moister areas, and so it'll fill that in and it'll change the ecology. So what was a wetland, it'll soak all that up, and it may turn into more of an upland environment. Kogon grass, so it was brought in packing material in 1911, and we fought the good fight to try to keep it out of Georgia, but it has been found in a few areas. We try to go out and eradicate those areas so that it doesn't get any worse. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say it's a losing battle, but yeah. And then Nandina, that's another landscape trade plant. I have some of that was planted at my house. Now I don't rip them out, but I do cut off the berries every year so the birds can't get them and distribute them. But you can find it popping up here and there on the sides of roadsides. So the fruits are going to contain cyanide, and that can kill some birds, so that's not good. So if you wish to keep them, if you have them in your landscape, make sure you cut those berries off so that the birds can't get them. So how are plants so successful? Well, rapid growth. They're going to grow faster than natives, much more aggressive in their growth pattern. From their root systems, sometimes they have deep tap roots, or they'll just grow or outgrow the natives that are around there, forming very dense mats, and they'll just kind of smother the natives. They use all the soil nutrients, so the natives don't have anything to use. Georgia soils aren't the most fertile, so if they're fairly unfertile, if you want to use that word, then all of those nutrients can be used by the plants, the invasives. High seed output. Yes, they produce way more seed, and a lot of times they'll reproduce earlier, so they can colonize faster than the natives do. For instance, like crabgrass, think of that as an invasive. 150,000 seeds per plant. And then the purple loosestrife, that's 2.5 million seeds per year. That's a lot. And so if they like the conditions, they can just spread faster than everything else. Efficient dispersal. So they're going to be spread by wind, water, birds, or humans. So that makes it very easy for them to get the seeds out and into new areas. They're going to thrive in disturbed areas. So invasives are going to colonize roadsides, construction zones, and other places. They're very long-lived, fertile seeds. So it may live in a seed bank in the soil for up to 30 years, maybe 60 years or longer. So yeah, it just, it's a very fertile, long-lived seed. Lack of natural enemies. It may not have anything that wants to eat it or parasitize it or anything like that. So there's nothing to keep them in check. I mentioned allelopathy, that about 52% of invasive plants release chemicals from their roots or leaves that's going to inhibit nearby plant growth. So that's a lot, and that explains why they're so effective at spreading, because they not only they have all these other things like extra seed and highly aggressive root systems, but they also put out defensive chemicals. Phenotypic plasticity, they can adapt their growth to a wide range of environments. So they could live all the way from Minnesota to Florida, whereas some other more native or endemic plants are very small and may only live in a couple, maybe 3 or 4 different hardiness zones. And then highly fertile. I already mentioned the seed, but they may have other ways of reproducing. They may have bulblets, they may have rhizomes, and that allows them also to move that way. So invasive insects, the spongy moth or the gypsy moth, imported in the 1800s as an alternative to the silkworm. We don't see a ton of these. These are a bigger problem up in the Northeast, but they can have egg casings with up to 1,000 eggs, and they can eat everything. So they'll just clean it off when they're the caterpillar stage. The hemlock woolly adelgid. So this one is decimating the hemlocks up in the North Georgia mountains. I have a cabin up there, and I had a couple hemlocks on my property, and I came up year before last, and these little bugs were covering the trees. So according to forestry, in a homestead or a home kind of situation, you can use drenches, insecticidal drenches. Imidacloprid is one of them to treat your trees if you have these, but you're not supposed to do that in a forestry type situation where you have acres and acres, hundreds of acres of trees. So I did treat mine and I killed them, but it looks really sad. So I'm hoping that over time I will just keep retreating and it'll bounce back, but probably not. The spotted wing Drosophila, basically a fruit fly, came in 2011, and it will attack fruit. So if you have already had problems growing fruit in your backyard, you may continue to have more problems because these guys will lay eggs in the immature fruit, and then as it ripens, the maggots will hatch out, and then, yeah, nobody wants to eat that, right? Fire ants. If you've lived in the South for more than a week, you'll know what these guys are. They come in red, they come in black, they've hybridized. I hate them. Everybody hates them. When they say ants in your pants, yeah, you're ripping your pants off if these guys get a hold of you. So entered in the U.S. through just natural migration, they'll eat anything. And I mean anything. Anything that gets into their path. They swarm. Motion attracts them. So just be very careful. Japanese beetles. If you have a lawn, you probably have these guys. They will eat all sorts of landscape plants, and the grubs a lot of times love to be in your lawn, your Bermuda lawn. You can tell that you have them because in usually June, maybe during a slightly warm and dry spell for a couple weeks, you'll start noticing that you've got little dead spots in your grass. That's where the beetle grubs have moved up and are feeding. So it's important that you get them treated with some type of a grub treatment, an insecticide. At that point, easier to kill them when they're little grubs than it is when they're adults and they're munching on everything. Asian tiger mosquitoes, hate these things. They're out during the daytime. And whereas I normally haven't had any problems with our endemic mosquitoes or our natives, which come out in the evening, these guys do bother me. So they are nasty. They leave big welts. I hate them. Red bay ambrosia beetles. These are problematic from many fronts. So they were identified in 2005. They carry a fungus. That's part of that larval food source. So when they lay their eggs, they'll burrow into a and we'll look at a couple of the trees because that's going to be like your avocados and the other ones the fungus is susceptible to. But the ambrosia beetles will lay their eggs in everything. We had a couple years ago fig trees. They burrowed in and they like the figs for some reason. And so you see I've circled them there. See those little toothpick-like structures? That's the frass from the larva as it's feeding, but it will burrow in and around through the bark, and it girdles and kills the tree. So there's that, just the physical damage, but in certain trees, that fungus will take up shop, and it basically clogs up the tubules in the cambium or the living layer behind the bark of certain trees, clogging off water and nutrients, and then the trees start to die. One of those is avocado trees. They're having a bad problem with it down and that's the laurel wilt down in Florida. So we're really fighting hard to keep that from getting up into Georgia. The brown marmorated stink bug. We all hate stink bugs in the fall and in the spring when they're crawling around our house. They stink. You pick them up to throw them outside and then you stink. Hate them. They are also a big problem in agriculture. They can cause, as they feed, they will cause cat facing or weird shapes and things like that, stippling on leaves. So they're a big problem for agriculture in addition to just being really annoying. We have crepe myrtle bark scale. I did have somebody that sent me an email and asked me to talk about that, so I put that on here. We do have it. It's not as big a problem as some of these other insects. It was introduced in 2004 on some infested crepe myrtles that came in. The big problem here is that the scale, so like whiteflies, scale, mealybugs, they all produce this substance called honeydew. So as they suck the juices from the plant, and it goes through their systems and they exude this droplet that's called honeydew. It has a lot of sugars, the plant sugars in there, and it can cause black sooty mold to grow. That can, if it's on the leaves, it can cloud over the leaves, and then there's no photosynthesis, and then that causes the plant to go into decline, and it's called the disease cycle. So if you see it, it can cause your crepe myrtles to go into decline. If you see it, treat it. Since it's an ornamental plant, you can treat it with an insecticidal drench, or you can spray it with an insecticide. So we usually recommend that. So how are invasive insects so successful? Well, bad identification techniques, sometimes they're really small and they just slip through. We bring a lot of fruits and vegetables and ornamentals into this country, and it's so easy because insects are so small. It's so easy for those to slip through. Department of Agriculture does a lot of investigation into this kind of stuff, and they do a lot of inspections, but they can't look at everything because of the vast amounts of stuff that's imported into this country. So, especially with like wood packing and pallets and things like that, insects are masterful at figuring out how to get in there. No, their new habitat doesn't have any predators for them. So normally that would keep their population under control, but that's not here. So there's always science going on in the background to figure out what is a predator, what is there a natural toxin? Is there something that will kill them and keep them in check? Public unawareness. So I'll use the lanternfly as an example. People were posting pictures of them on some of the garden pages. I went back after it was discovered in Fulton County, and I went back and there were people posting pictures of these things in Fulton County saying, "What is this? I haven't ever seen it before." That didn't make it to the insect ID pages, so a lot of times if you're seeing something new, you're the first line of defense. There's some links at the back that I'll have that will allow you to report things like this. And always, if you don't know what it is, take a picture of it. Well, kill it, put it in a baggie, and an alert extension. So no matter where you are, even if you're in another state, let your extension agent or office know, and they will know how to proceed. We can identify these insects and take appropriate measures. Broad dietary preferences, they just don't care. Just like the animals, they don't care. They'll eat anything. And again, large numbers of offspring. So you can see there's a trend. Invasive aquatic plants or animals. We'll kind of whiz through this. So hydrilla, that's one that is moving further north. We had problems of it in the south, but it'll go all the way up into the northeast. It can tolerate cold. It will choke out a waterway. So if it gets into a pond, if it gets into a lake, it will just choke everything out. And it will reduce water flow for recreation. So a lake that you love to go boating on, you're not going to be able to do that again. It lowers water oxygen levels, so fish suffer, raises pH, and it protects mosquito larvae. So yeah, lots of problems there. Water hyacinth, that's a pond plant that a lot of times people get too much of, and they go chunk it in the pond. Don't do that. If you have a water garden and you've bought some water hyacinth and it's now taking over the entire surface, do not go throw it in the detention pond. Do not go chunk it into Lake Lanier. Don't do that. Chunk it into the woods. It's a very prolific plant and can grow everywhere. So get rid of it. Just throw it in the woods. It's okay. No one's going to be mad if you do that. Giant salvinia. This is another water plant. If you have it in your pond, don't chunk it out into the river. Don't put it into the lake. Just don't do it. Throw it away. Put it in the compost bin. Asian carp. This is kind of a mishmash. These things are so that's the top, and that boat in the background is an electrofishing boat. And so they are very sensitive to electricity. If you go out into the middle of a lake that has a very healthy Asian carp population and you hit the electricity on there, that is a technique that is used for sampling fish. They will do this. They will jump up. And if they're big enough, they will clock you in the head and it hurts. So they're a problem and they outcompete a lot of native species. So yeah, and this was one that people brought in. And I hate when I see stuff like that, but it's considered a junk fish. People don't typically catch them and eat them like they would maybe a bluegill or a largemouth bass. But if you happen to be in a waterway that has them and you happen to catch them, throw them up on the bank. Let the raccoons eat them. They shouldn't be there, and they eat too much of the biomass. Nutria. So these are a problem in South Georgia. They are moving up from Florida, from the Gulf Coast. They're very large rodents. There is a place in Helen, Georgia, where you can go play with nutria. Yeah, they look like kind of furry beavers. I really hope that these people who have nutria up there are aware that they are invasive. Yeah, so they can eat up to 20% of their body weight. And there's very little demand for fur, so there's really no reason why people would go out there and catch them. And that was what was being used to control their numbers. They are also very prolific in breeding, much like everything else that's an invasive. So we also have the island apple snail, and these guys are, native to South America, but they also have lots of nasty parasites. That's one thing snails have. I know escargot and all of that, but that's cooked. Yeah, don't ever eat a raw snail. Just don't do it. You will get all sorts of bad stuff. They are huge. I mean, like huge, like hand size. And they are creeping up from Florida into South Georgia. Common carp, this is one that's been here a really long time, and they will eat all sorts of stuff in there and outcompete other native fish. They can also survive in very low oxygen environments. So if you have a pond and you've had a fish kill, it's like literally the only thing that's left in there because they're able to transfer some of that air. They can actually gulp air and survive. Red-eared slider, I know a lot of people see these out in ponds. Yeah, they're pretty cool, but they are also somewhat invasive and can outcompete some other native species like soft shell and some things like that. They're very adapted to colder weather, so they can live in warmer, colder. So that was one of the things I said. They're very adapted and very hardy. Eurasian water milfoil, another aquatic plant that was able to get out of the aquarium trade. People are like, I can't kill this plant, so they threw it out in the river or the pond, and then it flushed out into the stream and so on and so forth. Throw it in the woods, or compost pile, compost it. Don't throw it in the pond or into the stream. Lionfish, this is one that if you follow marine fisheries, and yes, we do have marine fisheries off the coast of Georgia, these guys are toxic. They have toxic spines and probably aquarium releases, but they'll feed on reef fish. So they bring the diversity down. So they actually will go out and spearfish for these things and just get them out of there. A single female can release up to 30,000 eggs every 4 days. Very prolific. And again, no natural predators. So why are aquatic species so successful? Well, intentional importation, game fish, people want to catch them. We have that problem with flathead catfish. They grow really big, but they'll eat all the natives. Some people are like, oh, I want to catch those over here in my lake or my river. So they go move them. Don't do that. They'll decimate the native populations. Erosion control, like with kudzu, aquarium trade, both for fish and plants, and water features. Don't throw it in the pond, the fish or the plant. But the global pet trade, there's a lot of stuff that's pretty. If you look at the cichlid populations, those are fish down in Florida. They have all but outcompeted the native fish down there because they are pretty. Yeah, they're just a big problem. And ballast water. So if you've got ports, you've got shippings that comes in, they release that ballast water that they pick up in another country, and it has that invasive in it, and then they release it here. Now it's here. So there's a problem. And there's no natural predators. And they have high rates of reproduction, so very similar to some of the others. Recents. So most of these people already know about. We're on the back half here. So Joro spiders, they're natives. They came into Gwinnett County in packing material. So back in 2014, these guys arrived along the 85 corridor and they escaped. I live on the Gwinnett-Walton line. It took until probably 2019 for them to get to my house. They were there one year, and then the next year they were everywhere. And now they are up into North Georgia. They're moving into South Georgia. They are very efficient at getting around. That's because they use a technique called ballooning. The adult spiders do not overwinter, but they are very good at laying up to 5 egg sacs that may have up to 1,500 eggs per egg sac. So if you want to help keep the numbers down in your yard, look for those egg sacs and destroy them. It's hard to find the juveniles in the spring because they're very small. They've got to go through successive molts to become those big spiders that you see at this time. But if you do see them, you can, eliminate them. I usually, the ones that grow across the paths that I walk in and around my yard, I will go ahead and kill those because they're in the way. But the spider is going to be what you see there. She's going to have, that's a female. There's sexual dimorphism. That means the female's a lot larger than the male. And she's very brilliantly colored. She's got these black and yellow legs, and she's got that bright red underbelly with the yellow and black stippling color on her rear. She's got a kind of a very sticky yellow web, multi-paned web. That's the easiest way to kind of explain them. And a lot of times the males will hang around in there. These guys are, again, very efficient at moving in and around the area. They are, it's not like privet where it took 2 decades for it to spread. These guys are very efficient in how they're spreading now. Yeah, it's a big problem, and, do with that what you will. There is a Joro cannibalism study that just was released this year that I thought was pretty interesting, and I'll mention that Joro spiders, when they're, the females specifically, when they reach a set mass where there's so many of them, they will actually eat themselves. So maybe that's a good thing. That'll help keep the numbers down. But, and I have seen some of that actually in my yard, but that's not going to take care of them. They're pretty much here to stay. Zebra mussels. I got my master's degree up in Tennessee, and they were a big problem up there. Zebra mussels are in the Tennessee River, in other rivers up in Tennessee, and they can clog, up in the Great Lakes, they can clog all sorts. So if you got a boat in the water and you like to go up to Tennessee to go fishing or recreating, whatever, you're moving down here, make sure that you check anything that's been in the water for these guys, because if they move in here, they are like barnacles. They will colonize and cause all sorts of problems. So they were introduced in Georgia in 2021 on moss balls that were sold for aquariums. But that's a fairly contained aspect of that. But they were found in 2023 in Lake Lanier from somebody that brought a boat down from the Tennessee River. So they are filter feeders. They're going to strain out a lot of plankton, but juvenile fish use that plankton. They are so efficient at both their reproduction and in their feeding practices that they can lay waste to an entire fishery and it becomes almost sterile. So not good to have. And they'll clog also like intake valves and things like that. Next up, the emerald ash borer. That's first ID'd in Georgia in 2013 in shipping crates. That's down at the bottom. You can see the exit hole, it's D-shaped. If you see some of those on trees, not good. Reach out to us. We will let you know what you need to do in order to eliminate those. But this is one of the primary reasons why you don't take firewood from your place and go somewhere else. Buy the firewood locally, because that will help prevent spread of some of these insects, which can decimate trees. So buy your firewood locally. The cotton jassid, I think is how you say it, that has first come on to the, it's new, like it's moved up from Florida and Alabama first identified in 2024, late summer, and now in at least 27 counties. So this is a big problem for agriculture. It'll cause leaf death because they're sucking the juices out of there, disrupting photosynthesis. Peanuts, cotton, eggplants, soybeans, all host plants, not good. And then we have laurel wilt. That's another one identified in 2003 here and in Gwinnett in 2021. It was up in Cherokee before that. And disease, it'll kill lots of trees. So you remember I said that little red bay ambrosia beetle that's also a invasive? Yeah, this is the problem. So you see in that tree there where they've cut back the bark, that is the fungus that they like to feed their young, and it clogs up the cambium and it kills trees. Host trees, sassafras, we have a lot of that here. Red bay, and avocados, which is not good. That's a Florida thing. So they're really having problems down there. And if you really like avocados, maybe get ready to pay $6 per avocado, because that could possibly be a reality, unfortunately. Oops. Hang on. There we go. Okay, one more. So the Argentine black and white tegus, these were part of the pet trade. And the part of the pet trade, they're South Georgia mostly, but they are somewhat cold tolerant and they can hibernate. So this might be a concern up into this area. Probably not a big deal in suburbia, but out in more rural areas, it may be. They don't have any natural enemies because they're big. They're up to 4 feet long, and they'll eat anything: reptile eggs, bird eggs, plants, carrion, small animals, including your cat or your small dog, and they carry salmonella. So they're not, we don't want them to have a breeding population here. So if you see one of these guys, make sure if you can catch it, great. Lock it in your garage, call animal control. But if you see one, report it. Next, sudden oak death. So this is one that has been on the radar. And I also put oak wilt down there. I have a slide dedicated specifically to this. So this is mostly going to be for oak trees. So sudden oak death is found prevalently in Texas and California and some other parts of the country, more arid areas, if you will. But it is it is found or has been found in Forsyth County. It's either for City of Forsyth or Forsyth County. I think it's Forsyth County. It was detected in 2009 in the waters. Now, that doesn't mean it's here. Oaks are the terminal host. It actually is transmitted and lives and can cause problems, and camellias and viburnum and rhododendrons. And we have a lot of those here. So it can be brought if you have a nursery out west someplace and those plants are brought in, it can hitch a ride. And then it's in the environment here. So symptoms are going to include leaf wilt, drop, and then you'll have spore mats and dead trees. It doesn't take very long. I also wanted to put oak wilt in here because that is here also. It will kill trees, oak trees, fast as well. Fairly uncommon still, but it's going to enter through wounds in the tree. So if there's a graft, like a root graft, or a graft on the upper part of the tree, sap-feeding beetles, they might come in there. They'll take some of the infected, spread it to other trees, and this might be a situation where we have problems like we did with privet, where for 20, 30, 40 years it's not a problem, and then once it reaches critical mass, it starts spreading very fast. Trees will die within 2 weeks to several months, depending on the species. Spotted lanternfly, I talked about this one. Native to China, first identified in 2024, moved from northeast down Fulton County, will feed on all sorts of stuff. And so sometimes I've seen people take blow torches and you get them mass feedings on tree trunks and they'll go up and they'll just, that's what you need to do. If you see them, let us know, whatever county you're in, if you see one of these, and I've got another slide for these too, you need to report it. It's very important that we know and we can hopefully slow down the spread because they can decimate your landscaping. So it's very important. Um, Yellow-legged hornet, this is another one found in the port of Savannah in 2023. They found a few more nests each and every year. They try to go out in the wintertime when they are basically dormant and find those nests and kill them. So that you don't have the reproduction, but they're slowly finding more and more. So it's creeping out. They're slowing it down, but it is creeping out. These can decimate a honeybee hive. That's what they feed on. So, and they'll kill them. So if you are down in the Savannah area, make sure if you're out hiking or walking or in your yard, you're looking for these guys. It's very important. The northern snakehead. So this is a fish and first identified in Gwinnett County in 2019 in a pond. It was brought over here. It's in like 14 other states. It was brought over here for food purposes, but it has the ability to breathe air and it can actually move on land, which means it can move from that pond into a river and it will eat anything. It'll eat frogs. It'll eat tadpoles. It'll eat other fish. Insects, everything. I mean, it's very important if you catch one of these guys. Another thing that you need to, these are all, if you see these, you need to report these. So this is the sudden oak death. I'm not going to go into the specifics. We're running low on time, but this is a good breakdown comparison of the two so that you can kind of see the differences between one and the other. And this is, like I said, I'm happy to provide my slide deck if you would like this as for informational purposes. And this is the spotted lanternfly. Yes, there are some bugs that look similar to this. So for this one in the yellow-legged hornet, I've got lookalikes so that you can see what they look like. The spotted lanternfly is on the far left, and then you have cicadas, you have the leopard moth, milkweed bug, white-lined sphinx moth, the Ailanthus webworm or webworm moth, and then the tiger moth. These all look similar in different life stages. You can see over here on the right. These are the ones that lay their egg masses on everything. Cars, trailers, pretty much anything that is stationary for like 5 minutes. They'll lay on it. And they eat everything. They'll suck the juice out of everything. And so they send plants into decline because of their in mass feeding habits. But their nymphs are very obvious, red and black. So if you see either of these, you need to kill it and then let us know where you are. So reach out to your local extension office or the adults. It's a shame. The adults are really pretty, but this is what their egg mass on the far right looks like when it's on a tree. Yeah, found September to June, give or take. If you see those, scrape them off, call extension. It's very important. Take pictures. Here's your yellow-legged hornet. And you can see next to the European hornet, which is one of the largest hornets that we have around here, another invasive. It's about the same size, but there's differences in their appearance. I always kind of say the European hornet looks like he's wearing a bikini top on the wrong side. You can now you won't be able to unsee it. But this is what the yellow-legged hornet looks like on the left. And it's always better to have lookalikes. So this is a good resource to have where you can compare all the different insects we have that look similar to this. And it has sizes on it so that you can be sure that you are looking at the right thing. So if you think you have one of these, now remember, it's Savannah, the port of Savannah. So if you're down there and you see something that looks like this, report it. If you're up here, it's probably not that. It's probably the European hornet, but you can use one of these look-alike informational posters as a way of, figuring out that no, it's not. But if you're not sure, you can always reach out to extension. Now here's your top 10 oldies but goodies. We're basically done. Kudzu, Chinese privet, Japanese honeysuckle, English ivy, Kogon grass, Chinese wisteria, mimosas, Bradford calorie pears, stilt grass, and the autumn olive or thorny olive. These are the oldie but goodies that have been around for a while and have just done horrible things to the Atlanta area. So what can you do? Report those sightings. I've mentioned that over and over. Join one of these wild spotter groups, a task force. You can, I've got links on the next page. If you're out there boating or hunting or fishing or camping, keep your eyes out and make sure that you're buying your firewood from the location nearest to where you are. Volunteer for privet poles or other invasive species removals. Don't collect seeds from invasives. I know it's tempting. Just try not to do it unless you know that it's not an invasive in your area. But really, just don't do it. Don't pick unidentified wildflowers. If you don't know what it is, there are apps out there for that. It'll tell you what it is. And don't release non-native species out into the wild. Mostly that's like aquarium trade stuff and animals, but plants too. So if you know that it's an invasive species here or where you live, just don't do it. Here's some publications. So New Invaders of the Southeast, color coded. So if it's got a blue flower, it'll show you in there where the blue flower is. Invasive species of concern in Georgia. So some good reference materials here, resources. If you want to report it, you can do USGS, EDD maps. That's another good place. Those are QR codes there. And National Invasive Species Information Center for some more information. And again, I'm happy to provide the slide deck, which will have all of this in there. If you don't want that, it's being recorded and it will go up on our YouTube channel and you can catch it there. Here's some more resources and reporting. Invasive Species of Concern, UGA, Center for Invasive Species, Georgia Invasive Species Council, Bugwood, Forest Pests, Pest Alert, APHIS, that's USDA, Pest Tracker, and in USDA National Species Information Center. So that is my presentation. I only ran a couple minutes long. Whoops. Hang on. So let me see here if there are any questions. If you have questions, you can dump them in the chat. And again, if you didn't get a chance to put your location, your town and state in there, I'd love to know where you're from. So go ahead and drop it in there. Let's see. I have a crepe myrtle bark scale on about 6 branches of a red crepe myrtle shrub. Treated it 3 days ago with Fertilome tree and shrub drench, and plan to spray branches that have scale with bonide all seasons, horticulture and dormant spray oil. Do you have any other suggestions? So some people want to do organic, which I'm not. The Fertilome tree and shrub drench, is that imidacloprid? If you don't know, we usually go by the active ingredient. So we need to know what the active chemical is in the product. Horticultural and dormant oil spray. Yes, that's one that can catch recent hatch. So obviously if you've got scale, those are the large adults, but they follow a life cycle. And so the eggs are going to hatch and then you'll get more, obviously. So you need to come back and you need to retreat, unless you're using some type of a drench, which will be present in the system of the plant. And a lot of times is there for, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a month, sometimes longer. It depends on the residual. Those I like just simply because it's an ornamental and you're not going to eat anything off of it. And as those hatch and start to feed, it's going to kill them. And plus it's going to provide some residual protection. So let's see. So slides, again, if you want my slide deck, my email address is right there, lisa.klein@gwinnettcounty.com. Simply just send me an email and in the subject line say I would like the slides for this particular one. This one is an invasives update, and I'd be happy to share that. Oh, we got a nice picture of a Joro. Yes, that's a big one. Yeah, I had one very large one that her abdomen was, I swear, the size of a dime, and her legs made her about 4 or 5 inches long. She decided to set up shop against the route that I walked to go let my chickens out. She unfortunately did not live very long because I'm not going to run into that in the middle of the night. Let's see, anything else? Is creeping Jenny an invasive? No, it's not. It is a landscape plant. I have found some people have problems actually getting it to establish. And then I've found some people that say, I have so much of it, I don't know what to do to get rid of it. But I tend to find more people that have problems getting it to establish. So, no, it is not, as far as I know, on an invasive plant list. Fertile loam is not a main ingredient. It would say somewhere that's generally the brand name of what it is. Bermuda grass is an invasive grass, but yet we use it for yards. It does take over. So I laugh at Bermuda grass because when you want it to grow somewhere, it won't grow there, but then it'll creep over into somebody else's lawn that has zoysia, or it'll creep into your landscaping beds, and it seems to love it over there. The grass is always greener. Haha. Yeah, I mean, it's a pasture grass, it's a lawn grass. There's new cultivars fairly often. Um, you know, I don't know if I would say it's invasive or anything. I mean, there are types of herbicides that you can use that are good for grasses specifically that will leave your broadleaf type landscape plants alone. I recommend those. They do better. Or you can just pull it out by the root. You have to, of course, get the whole rhizome and everything. Excuse me. But yeah, I mean, it is possible to do that. So, okay. Well, I think that's all of the questions. I don't see any new ones. Hopefully, you all learned a little something. And I reinforced that if you see it, do a little research. There are a lot of cool apps out there. I've done some presentations where I've provided apps for identification of insects and animals, plants, that kind of thing. So but in doubt, take a picture of it, and then make sure that you send it here. You don't need to call us. Send us an email with a picture if you're wondering if that's an invasive. But yeah, we are very happy to take a look and confirm yes or no that it's a problem. So thank you all for coming. And again, this will be up on the Metro Master Gardener YouTube channel probably by the end of the week. So we'll see you next time.